Well, good morning and welcome. This is our Smart Cities and Connected Communities Think Tank Roundtable. And our topic is discussion of ESG, which is environmental social governance. We're really honored to co-host today's event with the Keystone Policy Center and as part of their Key Conversations program. And we have both the chair of the Keystone Board, Paula Gold-Williams, and the CEO, Christine Scanlon, with us today, as well as Judy O'Brien, who does everything else that Paula and Christine are not focusing on. So we have and Marcus Chavez as well from Keystone, who is their head of communications. To start off with a warm welcome, we have Christine Scanlon, who really is an extraordinary CEO and a very dear friend of all of ours. Christine was previously the legislative director and head of key strategy for former Governor Hickenlooper. And before that, she was a member of the state legislature where she was in the leadership as majority whip. So we're really honored to be doing this again with Keystone, one of our favorite policy organizations. And Christine, please give our participants a welcome.
Thank you, Clint, and thank you for those very, very kind words. Welcome, everyone. I'm grateful you're spending a little bit of your time with us today. I have extended my thanks to our esteemed panelists. We really have partnered now on a number of these with Denton's through our Key Conversation series. And the policy and the discussion are always so timely, so important, and frankly, so relevant to our audiences that this has become a staple of Keystone's work and outreach as we work in a number of different policy arenas, including particularly energy. I'm particularly grateful that Paula Gold-Williams, our board chair, is on today, but mostly wanted to extend my thanks to everyone joining us. This will be a terrific conversation, and I am really looking forward to hearing from everyone, and as well as the discussion that we encourage through chat from audience members. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Clint Vince. Clint, you've been a part of Keystone, boy, as long as I have. So a good couple of decades together, but I so appreciate you and Denton's for partnering with us on this series, and thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Christine. And I'm honored to co-chair this think tank with my dear friend and partner, Emma Hand. And today, we really have an exceptional lineup, as Christine mentioned, and Gail will introduce each of our panelists, and you will get to see that for yourselves. Gail will moderate today, Gail Leone, who is really, in my estimation, a giant within Denton's and beyond. Gail is the co-chair of our U.S. ESG task force. She's the immediate prior chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Gail was the former legendary general counsel of Harley Davidson, and before that, the general counsel of U.S. News and World Report and a number of their affiliates, including the Atlantic. Gail also somehow in her free time manages to be a fellow of the ESG Center of the Conference Board and an adjunct professor at Georgetown teaching an advanced class in intellectual property. And she really is my go-to person whenever I have a really complex issue that requires the insight of a general counsel, or not just on ESG related issues, but really across the board. So Gail, with that, I'm going to let you get underway and introduce our panel, and we can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Excuse me, but I think legendary modifies Harley Davidson, not me. But thanks for that kind introduction. The topic today is what do ESG, cyber, and talent have in common? And why is that important anyway? Recent surveys of corporate board members revealed that these are really the top issues on the minds of board members. Companies, particularly those in the energy infrastructure space, will be evaluated on how well they position their companies as it relates to ESG strategy, how successful they are at recruiting employees today, given the talent war that we all are facing, and retaining those employees, and how prepared they are for what we know are the increased threat of disruption arising from cybersecurity risks and other technological disruptions. They also have in common ESG, talent, and cyber. The fact that all three go to reputational issues and brand issues about which boards are concerned, or at least should be concerned, because they go really to the heart of how a company operates and how they're perceived by their various stakeholders. So that's what we plan to talk about today. And we have a wonderful panel of experts who also happen to be a wonderful panel of thoughtful communicators on these topics. If you dialed into our first program for the ESG Smart Cities and Connected Communities in November, you met two of our superstars, Paula Gold-Williams and Morgan O'Brien. Paula is the immediate past CEO of CPS Energy and is currently on the board of directors of Emera, which is a large and growing company in the energy and utility space. CPS Energy, where she was the CEO, is San Antonio's electric and natural gas provider, and it's actually the nation's largest public power utility. So that brings some unique aspects to this conversation. And as Clint mentioned, she's also the chair of the Keystone Policy Center, our co-host for this program. Thank you, Christine. Morgan is the executive chairman of the board of Anterex, where he previously led the company as its CEO. And many of you know him as the visionary co-founder and chairman of Nextel, the first leader really in wireless network communication. Morgan has served on a number of other boards, including Sprint. He is now with Anterex, really building the foundation of a new technology landscape. And we will talk about that today because it is so critical to the infrastructure issues that we're going to focus on. Joining the conversation today is one of our co-chairs of the ESG pillar of our Smart Cities and Connected Communities program, Brian Keene, and also one of our Denton's partners, Allison Bender. Brian is the president of Smart Power. It's a US-based NGO created in 2002 with the belief that today's clean energy solutions require the same consumer marketing approaches as traditional brands. So we'll learn about what he's been doing in scale-up solar technology and employee engagement around that. Allison's practice at Denton's focuses on risks associated with data and technology, and she is my go-to person on all of these issues. She advises companies and boards of directors on cybersecurity, data governance, cyber preparedness, among other very critical issues. With nearly a decade of prior government experience at the Department of Homeland Security before she joined private practice, her clients really do benefit from her insights in this area, and we plan to do that today. Since we planned this program, the war, sadly, in the Ukraine has started and is ongoing. And boards have grown, I've noticed, increasingly uneasy, nervous about cybersecurity as a result of concerns about cyber threats. Understandably so, because I think it harkens back to the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, which was a Russian-based group called the Dark Side. And as you remember, while it attacked the billing system of Colonial Pipeline, not its operational technology, the company, as a precaution, shut down its entire pipeline, which caused major disruption. So an interesting question was asked corporate board members about gauging directors' Ukraine fears. How long do you expect the issues you selected, when they selected sort of the top issues and concerns that they had in the boardroom today, how long do you expect the issues you selected to remain a challenge for business? And John, if you could put the graph up, that would be great. So this was published by corporate board member and Diligent. And you can see that cybersecurity and talent remain a concern for companies with no end in sight. And all of these issues noted by the corporate board members fall within what we now consider to be ESG issues. If you look at employee safety and well-being, reputation, social perception, client relations, supply chain issues, and all of those are concerns that the boards are continuing to look at. And obviously, none of these have come off their radar screen at this point. So we can take this graph down now. Thank you. So Morgan, I want to start with you. You chair the board of Anterix, and you know intimately how the assets of critical infrastructure are becoming increasingly interconnected. And that all of those sectors of critical infrastructure really depend on the energy sector. There is concern about the increasing vulnerability to cyber attack. Do you think that concern is really valid? And what do you think a board can do to really be prepared or strengthen its position to deal with that?
Well, good morning, and thank you, Gail. It's quite an honor for me to be here. As I'm looking at this screen in front of me, I see three of my prominent mentors in my current role at Anterix. Obviously, Paula, from her position in the utility industry, Brian, who's a guiding light for me in solar, and Clint, who has taken me by the hand and led me through some of the thickets of the energy and utility industry. So as I reflect, I'm thinking that I have been the chairman of a public company on and off for 30 years, starting back with Nextel. And it's 100% true for me to say that ESG, as we're discussing it today, is new to me. And I think that's probably true of many people in my position. It's not that the themes and that the underlying principles are new, but the focus and the emphasis on ESG. We're getting ready for an Anterix board meeting next week, and I have been having detailed discussions with our general counsel, who oversees the development of ESG for us. And so let me get to the specifics of how it impacts us. And for Anterix, it's different from many companies, I think, in that our core business is directed towards improving the operations of utilities by providing wireless services, and cybersecurity is one first and foremost of what is in the top of mind of our customers. So the reason for being of Anterix is the ESG of other companies. So that's one thing. But then on the other hand, our own operations, and we're looking at every aspect of the way our company operates. And I was laughing with our team yesterday as we were discussing it, in that I'm probably one of the worst offenders in terms of pushing back on all the elements that our IT department, is trying to put in place to make us more cyber secure in our operations. But of course, those of us that are users of these systems know that every time a new security provision is put in place, your operational response has to change. And I'm sure this isn't true of Paula or Brian, but it's certainly true of me, that I'm a little resistant to that kind of operational change. But let me summarize by saying that if you're the chairman of a public company like Anterix, and you have a good staff working on it, ESG has now become as important as any other of our tasks for the way we operate as a company. So nothing is more important than getting all of these aspects right for the various constituents. And as we discussed it yesterday, it's our customer, our employees, and our shareholders, and all of them are actively day to day aware of what we're doing as Anterix, and are going to measure us by how well we perform. So let me end up there so I don't take up too much time.
But on the point of measuring, why don't we talk about that just for a minute? How do you think you will be measured? And if you were deciding on what that measurement would be, what would you propose?
Well, here's what's interesting. There's two different aspects of this. One aspect is substantively, what is the company doing? For example, on diversity, what are we doing when we go out to hire? Who are we hiring? What are our parameters? What are our choices? But the other is the metric by which we are evaluated compared to other peers that might be choices that investors are making, or that clearly would be choices that employees are making in today's hotly competitive environment. So there is the reality underlying it, and that's where a company like ours, a young company like ours, is constantly seeking to improve. But then there are the metrics that against which you get measured. What is the percentage of diversity? What is the percentage? How should you be measured against your peers? Is it talk, or are you walking?
So what about measurement for cyber risk?
Cyber risk, I think it's going to be much more difficult to come up with metrics. And I think that's what we actually at Anterix, we have experts that we have brought in within the last year that are trying to develop those exact things for us. So because we understand we're going to be measured by that. We want to be measured by that.
Right. I assume in the supply chain, you will have to be measured by that. Yeah, for others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gail, this is Paula. I just want to chime in a bit on this metric issue, on the security aspect of the transition and what we need to worry about. I mean, I think there are so many, measurements. There are management measurements, and then there are issues where the board needs to measure, what's happening. The challenge, I think, that the big issue is what we are striving for is to prevent the breach, and in reality, impossible to prevent them, because again, you have people where we spend all our time thinking about how to make the transition, how to serve customers, how to think about the environment in a way that gets us to our goals. There are people who are constantly, that's their full-time job, is how can I cause disruption, get access to systems, and then ultimately do what I will, whether it be go after money or go after control of an entity. So, but I will say that I do think that boards need to be thinking about, is your management team trying to create metrics that are not just one level deep. For example, we had a metric a lot of people do. What's click rate, right? What's the click rate of you having employees that are clicking links that are causing the breach to occur? And so, there's this focus on that. What I tried to talk to my IT and technology and security people about was, let's flip it on its head. Let's not just count the click rate. Let's also count, can we change the focus of being, how do we prevent and send the message to the organization faster that this threat happened over here, and what do we learn from that? Who's the better detector? Gamify it, do something different that changes the mentality of how do we defend ourselves offensively? How do we go after making sure that our communication is great, our spidey senses are up, our ability, how fast did we react to that threat, and how fast did we get the systems where we were able to optimize our architecture and isolate those risks? So I do think that it's a lot more difficult to come up with some of these metrics, but they can't be one layer. They've got to be as complex as the targets that we're being made of. Like, we got to make sure that people are thinking more broadly about how do you find and defend against these issues.
Gail, if I can just add some context to that real quick. You'd mentioned the war in Ukraine, but all of these companies are dealing with this in very real time, not just from Ukraine, but from a pandemic that started just 2.5 years ago. So what you've seen are major law firms or major corporations or mom and pop shops all of a sudden working remotely. So now you have all of their employees working from home, where they have to actually make sure they're secure, that they're working on secure laptops, that they're communicating securely with client information. And so it's not really simply just a matter of reporting this, but actually implementing it. So the challenges are really huge, and we have to make sure that everybody is being brought along at the same time. And I'm sure the folks that are listening to this are actually struggling with this right now. So it's something we should really keep in mind.
Well, and you raised a really good point. I want to get Allison's insights on this. We obviously are going to have a hybrid workforce in some form or another. I think that's pretty clear, because the talent in this talent war that we have going on is sort of saying, we don't all want to go back to work every day in the office. So given that, and and given the fact that a lot of, as Paula described, a lot of incidents are really human error incidents. What are you advising companies, Allison? I think this is really a critical issue today, because it's only going to increase one of the largest causes of cyber breaches, which is just sort of the human error of your own employees that are either clicking something or not clicking something. So, given that, what are you advising your clients?
Sure.
It's a real challenge, I think.
It is a real challenge, but I think a common thread between comments that we heard from Morgan and Paula and Brian is that better information can improve understanding, which translates into a culture of security that does provide better security for the company and can help escalate key issues. It's not just that you need to do a phishing test once a week or once a month or once a quarter, but helping employees understand why that's so important. 86% of all network intrusions come from a phishing attack. Why are we doing enhanced training about this particular attack vector? Well, we know that the energy sector is a common target of a number of key advanced persistent threats. And when sanctions go up, they find new ways to acquire funds, often through ransomware. We also know that there can be retaliatory attacks based on world events. And so having that more targeted and focused conversation, I think, with the workforce can help improve security risks, because as Brian has pointed out, the attack surface is now so much bigger. For boards, when I'm having those conversations, it's also helping them understand, not just how many incidents we had that were rising to a material level, but what's the bottom number? How many incidents did we have that weren't material? Maybe what are the common themes of attacks that we saw that were successfully defended? You don't want to point out every single drop in a hurricane. That is going to be information overload, but figuring out how to communicate where the successes are, where the threats are, and then if there are any general trends or patterns, what you can do to help advise the company and support them in prioritizing risk. And cyber is just like any other type of risk in that context. What are we seeing? How can we mitigate? How do we get out in front of this? Some of the most helpful things, I think, also are going through the process with a board of a tabletop exercise. Let's actually practice what are in our policies and procedures. Are you happy with the level of information that you got? Are you happy with when you received that information? And then how can we knit things together a little bit better to prepare for a real world incident? Because of course it's always going to be a question of when, not if.
So I'd love to know who you think should be at that table. And then I'd like to get, so from your standpoint, when you're working with your clients, who are you advising them to have at that table? And then I'd love to hear from Morgan and Paula and Brian about, their experience in connection with this, because I think many of us have done some kind of sort of crisis management preparedness tabletop. But who do you think should be at that table?
Sure. Cybersecurity is definitely a team sport. So it's important to have a diverse cross-disciplinary group of experts and stakeholders at the table. And I think there are also different layers, right? A technical tabletop exercise where someone reverse engineers malware is not really something that the board needs to be involved in. Similarly, for a more executive level tabletop, maybe the focus is on communications or legal. Once we're focused on more of a board level tabletop exercise, it really is going to go to those questions of risk that are existential to the company and how to comply at a more strategic level and work on those relationships between management and the board, because the board is also not going to be the one that jumps in. So how do we practice those handoffs and interactions? Certainly the chief information security officer, whoever's in charge of IT operations generally, if there's a focus on a particular business unit, how will our customers be affected? What milestones might we miss? What operations need to be prioritized? As well as legal to advise in a privileged investigation and to consider litigation and regulatory risk, communications, and then depending on the scenario, possibly HR, how are we going to tell our people? How will they be involved? What kind of external communications do we need to envision? So you can craft scenarios that test different aspects of that in a way that's going to be most helpful for whatever the priority risks might be for that company.
So Paula or Morgan, have you gone through one of these tabletop exercises? I'd be curious to see what your thoughts were about it. And if you were going to make changes in it, what would you do?
Well, yeah, I have gone through several of these exercises. I think what I'd like to offer is two things. So management, from the experiences I had struggled a bit in these exercises because, at the time you're doing it, you have to put in your people's head, this is not an exercise. You got to make them really realize it's not an exercise in the way that they respond. I saw executives prioritize because in a utility, something's always happening. Some systems always going down. There's some customers always having an issue. But I saw them in certain cases say, oh, I need to go do this. I'm going to delegate the exercise to someone else in my organization. I said, no, when this happens, particularly when you have a cyber threat that is huge and that could potentially affect your business, your reputation, your brand, that even in the simulation becomes the most important thing that you need to test your ability to prioritize that. And do you have the right escalating handoffs that are triggered? Because when that event happens, it can't be all of a sudden, oh, now I'm taking it for real. You really got to, even on exercises, make sure that your executive team really realizes that's the most important thing. But from a board perspective, what I would say is, where I found challenges is the board did not necessarily always understand that it had to figure out in its head how did it want to engage in the moment of a crisis. And because some of these triggers are sometimes hours, if you're lucky, not days, for you to respond to a ransom attack. Do you really need the entire board to be notified, gathered? It doesn't seem like it, but in a municipal utility, that's a huge complication, because when you bring a majority of the board together, you have to notify the public. If you're notifying the public, you're telling the bad actor that you are panicking publicly, and you can't do it behind closed doors. Now, if you're in a public company and your stock is traded, obviously you have the ability to convene quickly and to be able to do it confidentially. However, the way boards are comprised, all of you are very busy people, but are you going to put on your management the requirement to make sure that you're all informed before an action is taken? And those governance things need to be worked out. Do you have a head of a cyber and security committee? And do you have enough confidence in that chair of that committee to be able to manage that with the CEO and then cascade the messages down very quickly, and have a whole protocol of how every board member is going to be notified, but not necessarily before action has to be taken. So I think you have to make sure that your CEO understands that protocol, is able to follow it, but is not given some major task that they can't fulfill. They can't handle the ransom attack and then worry about whether or not they've informed every single person on the board.
How about you, Morgan?
Yeah, obviously Paula's experience is with a large ongoing operation, and I'm under 100 people, relatively new company. And so I will start with a confession that no, our board has never had a tabletop whatever, nor has it, to my knowledge, ever been even considered. Now, of course, it will, because I've had the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I will say, and again, this is my morning for confessions, that a week or so ago, I went to get on an important conference call, and I wasn't able to get on the way I always get on. And, when I was like punching frantically at buttons with 3 minutes to go, it turned out that the previous Friday, everybody had been informed, I guess, except me, because I missed it in an email, that we had added another layer of something. And I was getting a message that, in order to protect me, I wasn't going to be allowed on. And I of course, approached the whole thing with the ultimate of goodwill, and was smiling through the whole process. Maybe I can get you to believe that. But out of that has come as something that may be useful to others, which is we're going to begin to regularly, as a company, discuss the procedures that are coming and the reasons why, so that it's integrated into the operations, just the same way that we had regular meetings throughout COVID using a format like this one. We had regular team meetings of the whole company to discuss what we were doing and what the challenges were. And the suggestion I made yesterday as getting ready for this meeting is, it seems to me we need to do the same thing. We need to include everybody. So my answer to the question, who should be included, is everybody, because you're only as strong as the weakest link. So everybody should know where the vulnerabilities are. And then, of course, it'll percolate up to the board. We're not, we don't have the same operational immediacy, I guess, that a major utility would have, like Paula. So it's a little less stressful for us, maybe a lot more stressful for our customers who are utilities.
Right, but I assume those conversations will go to you as in their supply chain from the standpoint of, why did this happen? How do we fix it? What's going on relative to that?
Yes, particularly as we mature.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what the point that my team was making to me yesterday is that every one of these things is a process. We're at the very beginning of these processes. We have good cultural and instinctive practices in terms of a lot of these things, but the formalization and measuring it and being more formalized is something that we're going to have to do. I mean, it's part of NASDAQ. It's just part of good practice, and it's what our constituencies will be expected.
And I think many companies are in that stage. Yes, Brian, did you want to?
If I can piggyback off that for a minute, in my side, I have a side hustle basically where I run a tech company, and our IT guys have hammered it into us that basically every one of us needs to just be, quite frankly, paranoid that they are coming to get us. They're coming to get your laptop, and that everything that we click and everything that we put into our computers is part of the problem. So a quick anecdote is we were at some conference a couple of years ago, and you walk in and they're all giving you tchotchkes and all this stuff. One of them was a thumb drive that you put into your computer. And during some guy's presentation, he said, "You all got a thumb drive, put it in your computer and you can follow along in my presentation." People putting their thumb drives in. And he said, "So by the way, I've now just infected all of your computers." And he didn't really, but the point was, don't put anything into your computer that you don't own. And it is that nefarious. It's unbelievable. So to Morgan's point, it's every single person, from the bottom up to the top down has to be responsible. So it is serious business. It's not necessarily just some big foreign attack coming in to hit the utility company. It's actually, the intern that you hire who clicks on the wrong link that then sends an email.
But I confess, Brian, to being the one who is so annoyed by it because I still mistakenly think this is not a priority.
Right.
This is somebody in IT making my life miserable, which of course on a rational basis is not true. But it's hard. It's a hard custom over. It's a hard practice to internalize.
No, exactly.
Morgan, your whole company has a major use case to assist utilities with respect to developing their own private LTE networks to protect against cyber intrusion. Can you take about 60 seconds and address that? And the theme, of course, is the theme is you can't modernize the electric grid without modernizing communication.
And you can have more than 60 seconds.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Gail. But the challenge is to do it in 60. A private broadband communication system designed and operated in support of utility operations is far more secure from a cybersecurity standpoint if it does not interface with the internet. The thing that makes smartphones so fantastic and so smart is the level at which they integrate with the internet so that you can at any moment do anything. That is not what a utility or other critical infrastructure player wants to consider when they're running highly sensitive, time-sensitive, mission-critical operations. They don't want the vulnerability of being possibly accessed through the internet. So private radio systems, private communication systems, of which more and more is going to be heard, we're an example of it, permit all the phenomenal functionality of next generation technologies without the vulnerabilities of connection with the internet. I mean, in the right context, in the right place, nothing is more fantastic than interconnection with the internet, but not when certain mission critical operations could possibly be compromised.
So Morgan, do you think that that other public companies should focus and identify their mission critical systems? Obviously, one is their financial system, especially if they're a public company and they have to be reporting, and segregate that off of any public system and use private broadband. I'm curious.
Well, again, trying to stay within the spirit of 60-second responses. 60 minutes. I'd love one of those. 60-second responses. If you think about the future, for most companies, the future is going to be more and more instantaneous communications and measuring of different elements of the enterprise, whatever it is. And as that proliferates, and again, I think Anterix and our customers and the utilities are on the leading edge of this phenomenon because of the business the utilities run. But the measurement, this is what some people call the fourth industrial revolution, which is the proliferation of millions of measuring devices, sensors, tiny innocuous measuring devices, which in turn are constantly monitoring and collecting data, which is then being analyzed. So it's the Internet of Things meets big data, meets analytic, meets cybersecurity. I tell our Anterix employees, I mean, nothing could be more fun, which is also part of ESG, I guess. Nothing could be more fun than feeling like you're in the avant-garde of some major transformational thing that's taking place in society. But we are. I mean, that is what's happening.
I want to go back to one thing that Paula mentioned, because I think this is important. Obviously, CPS is more challenged in this just because of the fact that it's a municipally owned utility. But you talked about disclosure and the time frame from when you have a cyber incident, for example, and there are on the books today certain laws and regulations, and I'll get Allison to focus on that, where you have to let the state attorney general know, or other industries that are regulated, you have to send notices. But we were presented with an SEC rules on cyber recently. The comment period is ongoing, but a lot of the pushback came related to the notice requirements that were in there related to disclosure. And so, Allison, I'm curious what your thoughts are about that, because, you know, part of it is consumers would want to know, employees need to know, but when are the disclosures sort of helping the bad actors? And so there's a whole lot of conversation going on about that right now. And I'd be curious as to what your thoughts are and how you're advising clients about that right now.
Sure. So certainly the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2022, I think is going to be something to watch. And as you mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security has started that rulemaking process, seeking public comment and having listening sessions about that. That law would require critical infrastructure entities to report certain types of incidents within 72 hours, and also to provide notice if they've made a ransomware payment within 24 hours of that payment. That type of timeline is something that we've seen emerge for personal data, notably the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. We've also started seeing it in the US financial sector, notably with the New York Department of Financial Services, their cybersecurity regulation. But the pace of change in the laws and the reporting requirements is accelerating. There's also a pending SEC cybersecurity risk governance rule for publicly traded companies that would require disclosures within 4 days. There are also the existing requirements, particularly for public utilities. The laws vary state by state. You can still notify the government of Hawaii that you have had a cyber attack resulting in an outage by telegram. So in some ways, the laws are accelerating quickly, and that is driving a pace of change. On the other hand, there are laws on the books that aren't quite suited to the cyber risk environment that we are currently in. And for entities that are regulated in multiple ways, possibly publicly traded, maybe operating in many states, maybe have diverse energy regulatory environments that might be affected. All of those things need to be harmonized and reflected in your incident response plan, so you don't have to think about, well, can I send Hawaii a telegram or not? Just what do you need to do? When do you need to do it? And what is the trigger for action? So both the incident response plans, I think, are a place to review and refresh, and then continuing to monitor just this very dynamic regulatory environment, both from DHS and from the SEC, I think will be helpful for companies in the sector.
Brian, do you have any thoughts about that related particularly to the NGO community? I'm curious.
Well, I'm intrigued about about having Hawaii
Telegram?
Telegrams. That's fascinating. Well, what I think is fascinating with what we're seeing on the NGO side is, I'd say there's a point that that Morgan made that really rings home, which is that this falls on the rung of the top 10. This falls to about number 15 or 25. And that's too bad, because what you're seeing as it relates for the security piece, I'd say on ESG, because on the NGO side, we would say, of all the fires that have to be put out in any one day, this falls way to the wayside, and that's going to catch up. You're going to see that catching up. NGOs don't really think they're carrying a lot of privacy information, and yet they are, especially those that are fundraising and catching, tracking names and dollar signs for all their fundraising. So that's going to catch up. But then as we relate to ESG, as it relates on the environmental side, that becomes a really important piece. And that's pretty exciting, especially from where I sit. What we're seeing is really major corporations coming to us saying, how can we get engaged? What can we do? And that becomes a real opportunity. When I started my nonprofit Smart Power 20 years ago, we literally couldn't get corporate America engaged, or if they did, it was on a PR level at best. It was yeah, I'll put a quote in your press release, and you could see it. And it's not knock on corporate America. It's actually just where America was. That you could see it kind of moving ever so slightly. Today, literally, because now this is a bottom line issue for corporate America. Where are we on our ESG ratings? Where are we? Where do we stand vis-a-vis our competitors? Where do we stand ours are not only on a PR level, but are we actually making our marks, and how do we stand on our sustainability goals? And that becomes a real opportunity for us. So we are now able to say, look, here are the programs that you can implement, not just for your customers, but for your employees. Here's how you can actually be a real standout in your field and be sustainable and have real connections with your employees to actually bring them closer together, especially in a time of pandemic when your employees are working at what are in fact your kind of remote offices in their homes. Here's how you can actually bring them closer, create a tighter bond with your employees. Here's how you can actually become a leader in all these different ways. And so they're coming to us and actually really trying to implement key programming. And it's really kind of exciting to see. And then ultimately, this is not staying in their public relations. It's not staying, mid-level. It's actually going straight to the C-suite. It's really pretty cool.
That's great. Have you, Paula, when you were at CPS or looking at what Amira is doing, have you been partnering in that respect, similar to what Brian is talking about, or Morgan with your company?
I think the whole aspect of how utilities are functioning today is about, partnership. And I do want to tie back the other concept too about, there are increasingly going to be regulations and requirements in terms of making sure that the companies are communicating what's really happening and communicating exposure. But I want to tie it to the fact that the board needs to look at this as kind of a spectrum of what to report, how to partner, how to stay in compliance, with the end goal of really making sure that we are thinking about the end customer, our customer, on what are their expectations in terms of how are we partnering, how are we communicating, how are we upholding our level of responsibility. But not every cyber attack is against a breach of customer information. And Brian, you're right. Sometimes we don't think about the fact that when someone sponsors an organization, we're sending security information, we're sending ID information of a company, we're sending people's names, we're sending all types of information. But at the same time, a lot of the breaches that happen, particularly for utility, are where someone's trying to lock down a device, take away access to function from an operation standpoint. We have to figure out whether or not are they gaining access to the customer system, the system that we use as access to communicate to a customer when they call us. If it's not, if it's another subsystem, very important and very critical. Once again, though, the focus may not be that you need to worry about whether or not you've explained that part to the public or not. But it is one of those things where you have to create a whole matrix of what ifs. Is it something that's purely operational? Is it something that we need to function on the day-to-day? Is it something we can rebuild quickly? Is it something that a customer wants to know? I will say too that, being a municipal, what our governance was, we were owned and regulated by city council members. And they would express to us this interest of always knowing all the breaches that ever happened inside our organization. And because they felt like the customers needed to understand that. I think you have to create the layers and expectation. Again, make sure people understand that attacks are happening. Just, millions of attacks are happening on utilities all the time. And there's this new definition of what's normal and what's not normal. And do we need to desensitize our customers to tell them every single attack that's happening? Or do we need to make sure that we, again, are prioritizing creating the connections, having the right relationships so that our regulator, our people who are creating these new rules that should be helpful understand the implication of we have to be able to sequence. We have to be able to prioritize. We will pay attention to the things that affect the customers most, but our big thing is to make sure that the operations continue, that power is getting to customers and that they're making sure that their lives are unaffected in that moment, and that we're really, really paying attention to the full-time spectrum of how we have to do everything in that long list. And it does require that there's a lot of partnership, a lot of communication, as Allison said, extremely important all the way around.
Yeah, and I think the point that Allison made earlier too is that you don't want to inundate the board with, overwhelm them with so much. It's really, how do you prioritize it? Yes, Morgan.
I understand that Clint wants to make a point, so maybe I should let him do that.
You go first, Morgan, and then I will. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm thinking about some of the people in the audience, and I want to share this empathetic aspect, which is that the world is so fiercely competitive. It's so difficult to succeed in business on your best day, that to spend time and the energy necessary to move forward momentum in a business, in any business, is so all-encompassing that to be told, well, but then there are all these other aspects too. There are these other dimensions. You think what you're doing is hard? What about E? What about S? What about G? What about whatever? So naturally, there's a reaction. and I think what all that's happening and where government is stepping in necessarily, I think, to guide and to sort of make it necessary to do the right thing, and to prioritize, of course, because you can't do everything. But I certainly empathize with anybody who's listening, thinking, "Wow, isn't it hard enough just to run the business and whatever? Why do I have to do all this other stuff?" Well, the answer is, for the reasons that we're going through, you do. Sorry, Clint.
Change.
I'm so glad you made that intervention.
Yeah.
You know, Paula, you and Gail earlier were discussing partnerships. You were talking about operational issues on cyber. You had one of the most exemplary relationships in the United States with Joint Base San Antonio, which is the largest military facility in the US, had a major cyber arm. And you found a way to team with them, not only to protect them and your own systems, but also to find resources that really amplified your ability to be effective. Can you talk about that for a second? And you want to come off mute?
Absolutely. You know, San Antonio has been one of our terms that we are very endeared to is Military City USA. So there are multiple military bases, and it's Army, it's Air Force, there's a Navy aspect. I mean, there's a little bit of everything, because it also focuses on medical services. And everything from taking people in, helping during the initial aspects of the COVID crisis, to wounded soldiers and their recovery. So the medical complex is extremely big here, as well as flight coordination, and it's really critical. It also has a huge cyber focus. Probably second to DC's focus. So like I would talk to our public and to our customers and to our employees, in many ways, the success of the military bases in San Antonio was not just the success of San Antonio or Texas, but to the global missions of our military forces. So we're very endeared to their success. And there are many, many connections, and they're a huge employer. So there was just nothing that told us that it wasn't important for our biggest customer by far, when you aggregate all of their services, to make sure that we understand where they're at and what their needs are. At the same time, we I think a lot of people don't think this, but the military is interested in new technologies. They're interested in solar. They're interested in getting best price for energy provided. They're interested in efficiency. All those things make them a great partner, on top of the fact that they want to be both physically secure. I mean, we're talking a lot about cybersecurity, but the physical security of their operations and their personnel, and ultimately families of military active service people. All those things are really, really important. And what we found is that they were doing a tremendous amount of effort on their own, connecting not just the Department of Defense, but the Department of Energy, and really trying to make sure that they're looking at a wide range of services. So as we continue to work on our partnership, we could, by working with them, find resources that were available for us to harden the infrastructure around military bases, and which is a huge comfort to the leaders in the military, to the generals and to all the officers and the enlisted personnel, to make sure that they know that their operations can stay secure even when something happens. And one other example is, they also believe in microgridding, and our ability to help the military microgrid themselves when there is a crisis of any type, whether it's a cyber attack or, you know, active nature storm, those kind of things. If they can isolate and be self-sufficient and feel very secure that they continue their operations, it allows us to use all of our other resources to focus on every additional citizen in our service territory. And we would talk constantly about that relationship, Clint. You're right, to make sure that people would understand that the ability for the military to bring resources, to bring funding, for us to be able to match those resources, for us to be able to get projects done, again, was positioning us for a better way to function, operate, keep security of our area intact, and make sure that that we're, again, using other resources to help every other citizen in our community. Very successful.
Thank you, Paul.
I have one question that I'd love to get your advice about, and that is, given the current talent wars, I know all companies are really struggling to get the right talent in the chairs in their companies on this, on the cyber, but boards are also, concerned about this, and I'm curious what your thoughts about whether we've got adequate talent on boards in this space to really understand what these issues are and to advise and help management, focus on the right strategic issues. You're laughing, Morgan, so I'm going to ask you first.
Well, of course, the obvious answer is we have a superb board in every respect.
Yes. But I'm curious.
Let's just say that, yeah, I mean, you can always, but we specifically, consciously built the board for purposes of diversity, governance, technology. I mean, so it makes sense. It's the way. It's of course the way you want to operate, and we're proud of the result.
And where on your board does cybersecurity come in? Is it the audit committee? Is it the governance committee? Is it the full board?
Not nominating and corporate governance, which conveniently is run by our lead director, and she's a person of many years of experience in boards, and so the ideal person to sort of oversee that. We have a consultant that's been working closely with us and has, I'm happy to say, given us a very good report card so far on how we're doing, but is setting up more and more stringent hurdles for the future.
Allison, how are you seeing with your clients as to where this issue or area of concern comes into the board? Because that's something that I know boards struggle with. Historically, a lot of boards have had to go into the audit committee, but the audit committee is sort of overwhelmed now with other things as well. And so where are you seeing it come within the board?
Sure. I think the audit committee is still the most common place that we see it, but you're right, the audit committee is a lot of work and there's a lot of things going on there. So some of it depends on other committees that have been set up by that particular board. If there's a technology committee, sometimes that tends to be the logical place for reporting. To the extent that there's a risk committee that has been established, sometimes that is the place where cyber ends up being reported. Ultimately, I think it depends on kind of who the directors are on various committee assignments. Sometimes there's even a special committee established, but getting the information somewhere and having it be a focus area, I think can be really helpful. While the committee might look at it quarterly, also making sure that cyber issues bubble up to the full board at least once a year. Also, I think is becoming an increasingly common practice. And at the end of the day, if there was a regulatory enforcement action, all of the directors would be signing off on that. So it's important that people continue to be engaged, even if they're not the cyber director.
Yeah. Paula, you have any thoughts about that, especially as it relates to the new board that you just joined?
Well, interestingly, I think the standard practice of doing our checks really come through the audit committee. But I will say that Alice, in the comment, I think we design this perspective of at least once a year, these issues come to the board. But what we're finding is they're coming more frequently up to the board. And I think that there should be more of a focus to say, at a minimum, quarterly, the whole board how to be. In general, looking at the whole nature of what's happening, have a view of how the company is dealing with those experiences, both good and bad, right? How well is the corporate culture? I do think that the entire board needs to focus on it. When you're a utility, I think we're seeing, again, we're watching the issues in Ukraine. We obviously think that once the war started, that utilities again became a focal point of distraction. If we're distracted, there's a way for bad actors to ultimately take advantage of that. So we were paying attention automatically, not just because of a known security issue, but again, the connected concerns and risks that happen when geopolitical issues happen anywhere in the world. Again, you got to bring them back in and put them through a cyber filter. When we do it like that, it doesn't necessarily come through the audit committee and up. It goes directly to the entire board. And so I would even say when I was running CPS Energy, we were constantly, one of our board members who was heading up the technical area actually said that we want to know after every board meeting what's the latest issue in the cyber. And we created that sub practice where it didn't have to come through a committee, and that all board members got that sense. And I think in both cases, those are kind of going to be more the best practices going forward.
Yeah.
Hey, Gail, can I make a quick addition? I should have mentioned before that I'm sure this is true of many companies, that we have an ESG plan. It's on our website, and that plan reflects where we are. And while that plan is in place, we are developing a strategy to significantly improve every element of ESG. And as Gail, because you know her, we have our number one cheerleader and the most active person in this space is our general counsel, which I think is very convenient, because from the general counsel to the board and to me as the chair and setting up the agenda, there's no risk at Anterix that this is not going to get the attention that our general counsel Gina thinks it warrants, which is a lot. And so I feel like we're lucky in that. Not every company may have a general counsel that has come up through the ranks of thinking that way.
And your wonderful general counsel would have been on this program, but for the fact she's on a very well-deserved vacation.
Exactly.
And we are not calling her.
It's almost incomprehensible to me. Actually,
Brian.
I just want to make one point, which is just a caution that if we just are running these issues through one person or one department, we're going to run the risk of losing the point that these are cross-cutting issues. So cyber doesn't run through one person or one department. It's actually through every department. Environmental and social governance actually runs through every department. So they actually have to be discussed by all board members for all of the departments, for everybody. It's agenda items for everybody. So we just have to kind of make sure that kind of happens. Actually, to Morgan's point earlier too, about how we want to be concerned about governance, or the government kind of overlaying these issues on top of us. What I think, and I agree, we don't want government overlaying these issues. What I love about ESG is that this is corporate America actually taking it upon itself before that happens. So it's pretty cool that actually this is really corporate America saying, hey, we got this. let's create our own guideposts. Let's actually get an understanding of what those guardrails are. And let's do this before the government comes in and mandates what we need to do. So I think if we can be helpful, we should actually start to create those guardrails and identify what they can be together with everybody on this call, quite frankly, and like get some sense of how this really can be most effective for the corporations, for the nation, for the world, and like really get this right before kind of we get really, before somebody else strings us up. But like, let's do this right.
Yeah, the one thing I will add, though, is that we've been focused on the energy infrastructure, and obviously cyber is a big issue for any kind of infrastructure in this country. Other companies have different risk profiles, let's just put it that way, as it relates to cyber. And I think it's important for the boards to sit back and say, what's really mission critical for our organization based on what you were talking about earlier, Paul, and figuring out what is the most important for our business, for our stakeholders, and then design, a policy or have a plan that reflects where this is on that continuum, because I think that's an important element. We focused on energy today because it is a very critical issue and it is a big threat. And we wanted to talk about that because of everything all the moving parts that are going on right now.
Great point.
Clint, did you?
Thank you, Gail. I think that Brian's point and your point a moment ago are really worth driving home a little bit. The ESG movement is really becoming a mega trend, and it's been pointed out in this conversation that it is so strong at the moment that it is not just impacting corporate America, it's expanded to NGOs and it's expanded globally, and it is very real. I think there will be a couple of things we probably want to examine, and that is what is the likelihood of a backlash? I've already heard a fair amount of concern regarding the SEC rule that came out recently, and also just philosophically, we're in a very polarized country, politically very polarized world. The whole point of ESG was to do some things that our governments were not accomplishing. So on the environmental side, we have these warnings from, for example, the UN 2021 report that we're now so far behind on climate that incremental change won't cut it. We need transformational change. And yet we attend the COP meetings and there is not transformational change occurring, and certainly not at the pace that experts say is going to be needed. At the same time, to make transformational change, it can create a lot of angst. And I'd be anxious to get everyone's very quick reaction to the possibility of a backlash. I believe ESG is here to stay, and I think it's a mega trend, but I think there will be a very strong backlash. I'd be anxious to hear your views. And then, Gail, maybe after that, we can do a quick lightning round and let each of our panelists just leave the audience with a very concise message as to the most important thing you want to convey today in a sentence or two.
Well, I'll jump in a little bit. I think maybe there's a actual physical or tactical backlash versus this change in sentiment. I mean, I in general, we don't want to. We all understand that the invasion of Ukraine has had this huge global impact. And it's interesting, you know, when you watch Europe initially kind of, I think, be a huge leader in the commitment to the transition, but their dependence on Russian oil is in many ways, you know, putting a lot of countries and businesses in Europe in a position of trying to stay committed, right, to these goals, but deal with the current modern day issues that we have. And Gail, the survey that you had where, you know, the respondents said, you know, no end in sight because of all the uncertainty, you know, about something as—
Sorry, I don't know that one.
Sorry, that is my Siri talking. Sorry about that. Hopefully she will stop. But ultimately, you know, I think the backlash is, yes, we are behind, Clint, but I do think we're going to have some challenges that we're going to have more pressure currently, and we're losing time right now as countries are really trying to figure out how to handle this issue of where we are today with oil reserves. We do need to get off of oil. We do need to, you know, we're getting off of carbon, off of certain aspects of coal, all aspects of coal. I think that commitment is still there, but I do think we have this extra challenge of trying to figure out how to maneuver from where we are. But I don't think that changes, again, customer expectation. I still believe the customers expect us to make that transition, to be flexible enough to modify where we're headed and to change our steps in between to get to the goals in the end. I think our next generation of people who will run the world also expect us to move as fast as we can. It's a pretty daunting task. I think there'll be more frustration because of the complications of what are we going to do in our next steps. But the last thing I'll say about it is, that all said, we need to put more focus on innovation, more focus on development, more focus on new technologies. I have to applaud Morgan and Anterix. That is what he's offering to utilities are huge, but other companies have a really huge ability that they need to think again about how to prioritize and isolate their secure systems and allow us to make sure that aspect of the transition is going really well, and we're using new ways to do things in addition to how we're going to have to solve every decarbonization issue outside of energy, agriculture, every single aspect, transportation. All those things have to happen, and we still need to be leaning into technology and innovation the whole way.
Can I jump in? First of all, now everybody knows why Paul is my favorite executive in all of utility land. But
Everyone's favorite.
everyone's. I have a unique background in that I live the life of the wonders of the private sector, and I've been such a beneficiary of it, but always in a highly regulated industry. And so avoiding politics, which I'm sure we must do in a context like this, sure, there's a backlash, and sure, there's a push me, pull me between the untrammeled instincts of the private sector and the necessary role of government and getting it right, and it'll be back and forth. Nobody wants to be told to do what's right, perversely, and so it is going to be back and forth, and I can see the backlash. I live the backlash, but it's not going away. I mean, yes, it's a mega trend. Yes, it's a mega trend because those individuals who are going to be running the companies of the future, the near future, are born and bred in this environment, and that's, they will require no less.
That gets to your talent piece.
And could I jump into, I would just say this. In the 1990s, I ran an organization to eliminate the federal budget deficit. And we did that in 1996. And today we have the biggest federal budget deficit we've ever had. So So I don't know the answer. No, so I would say this, that climate change is with us. It is happening. ESG is part of that solution. I think what's going to happen, I think what we need to be careful about is that for corporate America to remain engaged and to be part of the solution, what they need is consistent expectations on how they can engage in that. And ESG, I think, is that solution. But if we keep changing the goalposts, if we keep changing how they can interact in that, they're just going to walk away from it and do what they need to do to maintain their businesses. So I think the onus is kind of on all of us right now to help them be part of the solution. And that's really, if we keep changing and moving the goalposts, they're going to just get tired of it, which is what I think happened with the federal budget deficit. They just said, oh, never mind. And we all just kind of said, we'll just survive it. So I think we should recommit ourselves to making this really work.
Well,
Allison, your thoughts?
Thank you.
Allison, you're on mute.
Sorry, I heard you both at the same time. There we go. I have to agree. ESG is not going away. I think cyber is increasingly going to be viewed through the ESG lens, and cyber, even independently of that, is not going away. If anything, as we look more and more to technology and innovation to solve challenges, there will be inherent risks with those different pieces of technology, different innovative approaches. And so cyber, I think, is going to become a permanent part of our lexicon, both for management and boards going forward.
Great.
thank you, Allison. You know, when Paula's Siri made a comment a few moments ago, it triggered an event. I was running a major session on cyber for a think tank, and I was really doing a wind-up pitch talking about how cyber was intruding at exponential rates. And my iPad at exactly that moment said, "I'm sorry, I didn't get that." Through Siri. And it was perfect timing. But we have literally just a minute for each of you to give us a wind-up. This has been such an exceptional session. As you know, we had high expectations. You've exceeded them. If you can each just give us a really succinct closing, and then I will ask Christine to close out the session. So would you like to start us out, Morgan?
I'd love it. Thank you. In my view, on this topic, the glass is 100% half full. And as long as we keep talking about this from every point of view, I mean, I think the audience can sense that Brian Keene and I might occupy different sides of some of these issues, and have profound respect for each other. And I'm there's nothing more important to me than solar, for which he is such an able spokesman. So no despair out there. These are the very right things to be engaging energy and debate and discussion, and more and better will come from it.
Classic uplifting Morgan O'Brien message. We needed that. Paula, would you like to go next?
I guess what I would say is, the redefining the normal, right? The new normal that we have. Then it is not going to go back to less disruption. It's not going to go back to no new technologies that we have to burden ourselves with in some ways to put our hands around and embrace and absorb. And as board members, really understanding that this is it. And Allison is correct. ESG is tied to every single thing that we have and the cyber threats that occur. And maybe I was laughing, you know, Morgan, when I was CEO, I think my whole organization tried their best to punk me in terms of cyber threats. And maybe the metric is how frustrated can you make your CEO with like how many things can be, you know, done at your expense where you're the last person to know kind of thing. But it is in some way, let's get over ourselves. Let's not take ourselves to the point where we're rigid. We as board members need to be flexible as well and make sure that we're enabling our management teams to do the right thing, to keep their eyes on a swivel and making sure that they're paying attention to everything and learning how to prioritize that all the way aspect up to, I say at the top again, our customers are the most important for us to think about. How are we going to move forward no matter what businesses we're dealing with? Put everything in front of us. It's a portfolio we're managing.
Wonderful. Brian?
Well, I just echo all of that and also just thank everybody for being a part of this. When I started Smart Power 20 years ago, we couldn't have imagined that corporate America would be so engaged in all these issues. It really is gratifying that this is how all these issues are going to be solved, I think, is when corporate America is actually embracing and leading on these. And that's where this is right now. I think our responsibility is in giving corporate America the guideposts, giving you the rails on where this goes to. Otherwise, shame on us. So, and then I would just echo Morgan that I 100% believe the glass is half full. So thank you all.
Thank you, Brian.
Allison?
I have to echo, you know, all of the prior remarks and agree wholeheartedly. I think what is going to be transformational as we move forward really is helping refine the information so that it is timely, actionable, and relevant, and that it helps bolster those critical risk management skills and ultimately becomes ingrained as a matter of culture, whether that's cyber, environmental, talent, any of the ESG issues. And that's really going to become, I think, what we see in the next phase of this, that it has become so infused at all levels that it's just part of day-to-day practice. And certainly prevention would be better than the cure. So it's a great time to focus on that.
And thank you. My only comment, or my last comment, Clint, would be that it's a team sport. I think we've demonstrated that today. I think you need the right team, whether it's on the board, in your management, your C-suite, your outside advisors. I want Allison on mine. And also not being afraid to bring some experts into the conversation, whether they're communication experts. Would never go through one of these crises without bringing in my favorite folks at DGA to help with communications through this, because you have to talk to all the stakeholders that you have and that you've identified for your company. So it is definitely a team sport. And I think the more we can remember that and we put the right teams together, I think the better we will all be.
And Gail, we're so pleased that you were able to lead our team today as our moderator. You really, we wanted you, and you really did a spectacular job. You never disappoint, but this was really special. And so, Christine, would you like to close us out?
I am glad to. And what an awesome dialogue today and conversation. And Gail, you are masterful in leading the discussion. I just want to extend my thanks to all of our really amazing panelists. I learned a lot. And Gail, I'm going to kind of echo some of your comments. Keystone works at the nexus of often policy, controversy, politics, and stakeholders, and how to bring people together. And we believe strongly that solutions are best arrived at when you have a diversity of perspective and input behind those. And the nexus between cyber and ESG certainly necessitates that. I like the creative partnerships model. Paula talked a little bit about CPS in the military. I feel like it's technological innovations, but it's also people innovating and being creative and working on collaboration. One of my colleagues likes to say, collaboration operates at the speed of trust, and building that from the board throughout an entity is really important around these really, really interesting but difficult and challenging issues. And I'm more than glasses half full person. Can't work in conflict resolution if you're not an optimist. So thank you, Morgan, for ending on that note, and all those who echoed those sentiments.
Thank you, Christine. And special thanks to each of you. On behalf of our participants, I'm going to give you an ovation and deep appreciation. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.